Welcome to my presentation on the classes which I observed at Westminster Kingsway College, Victoria Centre. Over the last 2 weeks I've been observing classes and I observed about 5 different classes for a total of 10.5 hours. My specialism was in digital design, but some of the classes which I watched weren't actually related to this specialism. In the first week, on the Wednesday, I watched 2 different classes. The first one was in game design in the morning. That was for about 3.5 hours. In the afternoon, I watched an ESOL class that lasted for 1.5 hours. The second day of observations was on the Friday of the first week. We only watched for half a day. On that morning, I watched an ESOL class for 2 hours. Then, in the second week on the Tuesday, I watched 2 media classes. In the morning, I watched a media class which lasted 2 hours, and then I watched one in the afternoon which lasted 1.5 hours. The 3 things that I was really interested in the lesson all had to do with learner-centeredness. The first one I noticed was that the teacher had a good rapport with the students in the class. There was perhaps less distance between the teacher and the students than I would have in my classes. Teachers and the students could joke together and could talk together about subjects which they had in common. This is learner-centered because the teacher and students can talk together as equals. It means that they will have better communication with each other. The student can then approach the teacher with what they want to learn in the class. Secondly, another learner-centered point is that the teachers tended to ask a lot of questions in the class, much more questions than would be asked in a Korean class. This is probably something to do with the first point, that the student and the teacher are meeting each other as equals, so they're not afraid to talk together. I noticed that sometimes the teacher even goes off topic when trying to answer a question which the student has, and sometimes even other students will answer each other's questions or even make groups to talk about problems which another student will have. This means that lessons are centered on what the students actually want to learn about the topic rather than what the teacher wants to teach about it. The third point that I noticed was that the teacher tends to set the students a number of tasks which they must solve in groups. This means that here the teacher is the facilitator. The teacher is not teaching, they are merely monitoring and advising the students on what they are learning together. As a result, students will have to work together to solve these problems. This kind of is just like in real life in the workplace, where different colleagues have to work together to solve problems which arise there. This means also that the lessons provide appropriate cognitive challenge to students. They're difficult enough to keep the students interested. However, there were also some negative points which I noticed about the classes that I watched. Most of these had to do with classroom management and how the teacher looked after the class. The first one was that I noticed that a lot of the students were coming in late for the classes. The teacher didn't say anything to the students when they came in late, and he didn't mark on the register that they were late, so there were no consequences for them coming in late for class. The teacher also didn't help the students to catch up with the class, didn't tell them what had gone on before, and I think it was very disruptive for the class, and was bad for the students who had been there from the start of the class. The second point is also related. Some students didn't pay attention during the class. I noticed some students looking at phones, some of them were sleeping, some of them were talking with their friends, and they did this very openly. They didn't even try to hide it from the teacher, which I thought was maybe very disrespectful. And the teacher, even though he saw this, he didn't do anything to stop them. And again, I think it is kind of disruptive for the students who wanted to work in the class. The third point is also related to this, that some of these students who were doing nothing in the class, they appeared to be very demotivated, and perhaps they couldn't actually do the work which they had been given in the class. Again, the teacher did nothing to help them. He didn't pair them with other students, other stronger students, and he didn't encourage them to work harder in the class. I think that to implement the good points which I noticed in the UK classroom, in my Korean class would take a lot of hard work. Firstly, I think that the students' attitudes need to be changed. Quite often they rely on the teacher all the time. I think that the teacher is the only source of information in the class. Instead, I want them to start to help each other. Secondly, I think that I need to establish more of a rapport with the students in my class. This will encourage them to start speaking in the class so that they're not afraid to ask me questions, and I can make the class more learner-centered. Once students get used to working together and I get used to speaking to the teacher as an equal, this means that they can then be more self-reliant. They will be able to work without the help of the teacher. The teacher will be the facilitator. I will be able to set them tasks, and they will be able to complete them while I just advise them on any mistakes which they're making. However, I will also have to be careful to avoid the negative points which I've observed when looking at the UK classes. Mostly the items related to classroom management. I think to do this, I will have to work with my students to establish a set of rules which we all agree to, we all adhere to during the academic year.